My name is Margaret Hill, though most of my family barely remembers to call me anything other than Mom, Grandma, or worse, just her. I turned 60 last February, and after 4 decades of quietly serving my family, cooking, cleaning, bending schedules around weddings and grandchildren, and tolerating the sharp little cruelties that pile up when people take you for granted, I thought I had finally bought myself a slice of peace. Friends, you enjoy listening to stories, but you don't subscribe to the channel or like the videos. I request you to please subscribe to the channel right now so that I get more motivation to bring you even more stories. If you help me reach 1,000 subscribers, I promise to bring you extremely best stories with a truly real feel, so go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and now let's move on to today's story. The cabin was supposed to be mine. Nestled in the mountains of northern Idaho, the logs were rough-hewn but sturdy, the kind of rustic place I'd dreamed of ever since seeing photographs in Sunset magazine when I was a newlywed. My late husband, James, always dismissed my longing for a retreat. He said vacations were for people who didn't have enough to do. After he passed, God rest his weary, dictatorial soul, I decided to finally do something for myself. With the last of my savings from years of substitute teaching, I signed the deed. Standing there on that porch on a soft June afternoon, breathing in the balsam and pine, I felt a freedom no one had ever allowed me before. That moment lasted exactly 10 days. Because on the 11th, my daughter-in-law, Cassie, smashed through it with a single phone call. The line began with no hello. "So Mom," she said in her falsely sweet voice, "we're heading up to your cabin next weekend. 22 people. You'll have the rooms ready, won't you? And make sure there's food. Everyone's expecting a feast." 22 people. Not an invitation, not a question. An announcement. I clutched the phone so hard I thought the veins would burst in my hand. That cabin, the one place I thought was mine, had suddenly been declared public property. Worse yet, the benefactor was me. I wanted to say no. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hang up the phone and disappear into the trees. Instead, a brittle little laugh slipped out, and I heard my own voice agree. Because that's how it always was in my family. I raised 3 children. My eldest, Martin, the golden boy, was an engineer who lived in California. My middle daughter, Claire, had always held a simmering resentment toward me, claiming I hadn't supported her enough through failed marriages and bad choices. And then there was my youngest, Daniel, my sweet boy who had married Cassie, the daughter-in-law whose voice still rang in my ears like a crow. I had always made excuses for them. For their bossiness, their ingratitude, the way they turned my sacrifices into expectations. Thanksgiving? That was Mom's. Christmas dinners? Mom does it. When I once suggested we rotate, you'd have thought I asked them to amputate a limb. So yes, I said yes to Cassie. And as I stood in my cabin, staring at the wood-paneled walls, I realized the truth. These people had mistaken my kindness for weakness my whole life. But this time would be different. Because by the time those 22 people walked through my cabin doors, I had decided on something I never thought possible. A calculated, quiet revenge, with the mountains themselves as my witness. The week before their arrival, I went into town under the guise of stocking up. The grocer, a kind young woman named Melissa, looked at my shopping list: 20 pounds of rice, bulk beans, and an odd assortment of vinegar and lemon juice. "Planning a party?" she asked. I smiled thinly. "A family reunion." She smiled back, a little too sympathetically, as if she knew exactly what that meant. Inside, my rage hardened into resolve. My children and their families had never brought food when they visited me. They never offered to help wash a dish or sweep a floor. And now, they would come expecting me to play hostess in the very home I had bought for myself. Well, if they wanted a gathering, they would get one. But on my terms. The first SUV wound up the gravel drive on Friday evening. The door flew open, and Cassie sprang out in leggings that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Her smile was wide but not warm. "Mom, look at this place. It's quaint." "Oh, but you'll need to get Wi-Fi put in. None of us can live without it." Her children, my grandchildren, spilled out behind her, dragging their designer bags through the dirt. They barely acknowledged me before demanding snacks. Within 2 hours, 4 more vehicles filled my drive. Cousins, partners, in-laws, all hauling coolers filled not with shared meals but soda, beer, and chips, things they'd consume themselves while waiting greedily for me to serve. By night, my once quiet cabin echoed with demands. The walls, which had seemed like a sanctuary, now pressed in with suffocating noise. Someone complained about the mattress. Someone else about the air smelling too woodsy. Cassie asked why the screen doors squeaked, as though I had failed a maintenance inspection. I moved through it all like a hollow ghost, smiling stiffly, fetching towels, arranging sheets. Every time I felt burned by their casual cruelty, I added another line to the plan forming in my head. That first night, I lay awake listening to their laughter, booming, careless, filling every corner of the house as though I didn't exist. And I whispered to myself, this is the last time. The last time they use me. The last time they invade. The last time they forget who I really am. By morning, my plan was ready. And what none of them knew was that the woman they thought was weak, the one who had always bent and served, had finally reached her limit. What they also didn't realize was that a mountain cabin hides secrets more easily than a suburban home. And I had more than enough time to teach this family what happens when the matriarch stops playing servant and starts playing God. Morning came earlier than usual in the mountains, with a pale mist curled tight around the cabin. I was up long before the others, the way I always was, my body trained after years of pre-dawn cooking and chores. Still, I moved through the kitchen quieter than I ever had before. The coffee I brewed was just enough for 1 mug. Mine. By the time Cassie wandered down in designer pajamas, stretching and yawning, I was already seated at the table, sipping it slowly. She froze when she saw the half-empty pot. "Is that all you made?" she asked, her tone sharp, almost accusatory. "Yes," I said simply, meeting her eyes. "That's all." Her eyebrows lifted, and for a beat, she seemed caught off guard. But Cassie was not a woman who took defeat easily. "Well," she sighed, pulling a mug from the cabinet, "I guess we'll need more next time. You know these people need their caffeine." I didn't move to help her. I didn't tell her where the filters were. I sat there, sipping what was left in my cup, staring at her until she offered a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smallest shift, but it was a beginning. Food had always been my prison chains. For decades, I cooked meals for 30 on holidays, shopped for feasts while my children showed up empty-handed, and scrubbed dishes while they laughed in the living room. Not this time. That afternoon, they asked about dinner. Martin strutted into the kitchen, patting his belly. "What's for tonight, Mom?" "Something hearty, I hope. You know the kids." I turned from where I was chopping onions, nothing more than a bear stew, and smiled. "Dinner will be simple. Cabin living is like that. There'll be enough for everyone if we're sensible." By sensible, I meant portions the size of my palm. Their faces fell when I served watery bowls with an uneven chunk of carrot floating in each. A single slice of bread per person. No seconds. "Mom," Claire hissed, "this isn't enough." I let my spoon clink against the edge of my bowl. "This is what I have prepared. Cabin life isn't indulgence, dear. It's restraint. I assumed you came for the experience, not for excess." The silence was thick. A few of the grandchildren complained half-heartedly before Cassie hushed them, too aware, perhaps, that contradicting me directly might snap something fragile in the air. That was the first hungry night. Not the last. Isolation works best when it is invisible, when people don't realize the trap has been set until they're inside. I began to ration other things too, electricity, water. I told them the generator was weak, that we couldn't run too many devices. When one of the cousins asked about Wi-Fi, I shook my head. This is a place to reconnect, I said, smiling thinly. With each other. The sneer Cassie tried to hide told me she didn't appreciate reconnection. By the third night, I overheard them whispering in the hallway. She's losing it, Martin muttered. What is this game she's playing? It's control, Cassie answered. She loves the power when we all depend on her. Maybe she thinks she can finally prove she matters. I waited in the darkness of my room, the old quilts rough against my palms, and I smiled. They thought they were diagnosing me. They didn't understand the diagnosis belonged to them. I kept the fires low, so the nights were chilly enough to make them pull sweaters tight. Cold seeps into bones when you're unused to it. One evening, as the fire snapped weakly, I asked, "Do you remember the last family Thanksgiving? The one where I cooked for 16 hours, and by the time I sat down, there was nothing left for me?" The room fell silent. A few eyes darted toward the floor. "I remember," Claire muttered. I rubbed my hands together for warmth and leaned forward. That was the night I realized something. I realized none of you would ever take care of me the way I had taken care of you. And here we are now, still, I cook, I clean, I host. Tell me, when was the last time any of you lifted a hand to help me? The silence lasted longer this time. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Cassie bit her lip, her jaw tightening. Then Martin chuckled, though it sounded forced. Come on, Mom, don't be dramatic. We've always appreciated you. Appreciation, I said softly, without action is just a word. On the fourth day, the mountain air turned ugly. Dark clouds rolled down over the peaks, and a thin rain began to fall. I knew, because I checked the NOAA forecast religiously, that it would storm for 2 days. Perfect timing. The roads would be slick, the gravel treacherous. No one would risk leaving. By the second night of the storm, tempers flared. Children whined for food I no longer prepared. Adults bickered over bedrooms, mattresses, and whether it was worth braving the storm to get back to town. I sat in my armchair by the dying fire, crocheting in silence, listening to them unravel like threads in my hands. And then, true to form, Cassie cornered me. This has gone too far, she spat. We are your family, for God's sake. Feed us. Make this place livable. What is wrong with you? I closed my eyes for a moment, my hands still on the yarn. Then I looked up at her, calm as the rain outside. What's wrong, Cassie, I said, voice steady, is that you thought I was the servant in a house I built. What's wrong is that you mistook my silence for weakness. And now, you're seeing what happens when silence finally decides to speak. Her face drained of color, and she stepped back as though she'd seen something feral flicker in me. She wasn't wrong. Because I had only shown them the beginning. The real revenge hadn't started yet. By the fifth night, the storm outside was still clawing at the mountain. The windows rattled in their frames, rain streaking the glass, and the roads had turned to rivers of mud. There would be no escape until the skies cleared. Which meant they were trapped with me. That evening, instead of preparing a stew or bread, I placed one large pot in the center of the table, a thin broth with floating cabbage leaves. Enough for half, maybe, if served generously. I set the ladle down and folded my hands. Serve yourselves, I said, stepping back. The sight amused me. My children, grown men and women with careers, houses, mortgages, became impatient vultures in seconds, scooping greedily before others could. Grandchildren whined at empty bowls, couples snapped at each other, and Martin even barked at his teenage son for taking too much. It was theater. And I was the director. You see? I murmured, loud enough for them to hear. This is how quickly kindness gives way when there is not enough to go around. No one looked at me. Not yet. But guilt smoldered in the corners of their eyes. By the next morning, I made another announcement. The generator must be preserved, I declared while they gathered sleepily in the living room. We can't waste it on hairdryers, phones, or chargers. If it fails in this storm, we'll freeze. A few of the younger ones groaned, clutching dead cell phones. Cassie's eyes widened in protest. What are we supposed to do, sit here twiddling our thumbs? The kids need entertainment. They have cousins, I said, shrugging. They have their imaginations. She wanted to argue. I could see it. But pressing me now would make her look unreasonable in front of the others. She pressed her lips together instead, seething quietly. When night came and no glowing screens flickered to life, the weight of real silence crushed the house. They were forced to face one another, their spouses, their siblings, their resentments. Conversations turned sharp, accusations slipped out. By strangling the light, I knew I was letting the shadows grow. It wasn't enough to watch them squirm. Real revenge, the kind that lasts, requires division. I began whispering. To Claire, I confided softly, your brother Martin always looked down on you, you know. He said once you never made anything of yourself. Perhaps that's why he bullies you about your choices. To Martin, I said, Claire told me she resents how successful you are. Says you always flaunted what she doesn't have. To Daniel, my youngest and the one I had always loved the most, I murmured, Cassie told me once she felt she saved you from being like me, small, invisible. That she doesn't think you'd be much without her. Every word was like a drop of poison in a glass. On its own, harmless. But together, deadly. By the second day, Claire was shouting at Martin in the hallway about thinking he's better than everyone. Martin snapped back, dragging up old childhood grievances, words as sharp as knives. Daniel began retreating from Cassie, his tone clipped, his jaw tight. Even the grandchildren felt the ripples, watching wide-eyed as their parents fractured. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to lift a hand. I simply let them destroy each other. It didn't take long for Cassie to confront me again. She cornered me while I sat crocheting, the storm still beating its drums outside. What are you doing to them? She hissed. I lifted my eyes, calm as still water. Nothing. They're doing it to themselves. Perhaps you don't realize how fragile your family really is. Perhaps you only ever held them together with distractions, food, noise, holidays where I did the labor while you all pretended at unity. You're insane, she snapped. This isn't teaching anyone anything, it's cruelty. I let my lips curl at the edges. Insane? No. Insane is spending 60 years of my life cooking and cleaning for children who thought love was measured in casseroles. This, what I'm doing now, this is sanity. Finally. Cassie's face flushed red, her hands trembling. But she didn't scream. She didn't dare. Somewhere in the storm of her anger was fear. Fear of what I might strip from her next. The storm forced us deeper together. I heard them murmuring late into the night, plotting perhaps, whispering that something had to be done about me. I almost laughed in my bed, pulling the quilt to my chin. They thought they could outmaneuver me in a place I controlled? This cabin, the one I had chosen, paid for, and now ruled, was mine. It had always been mine, though I didn't understand it until now. And tomorrow, I would prove to them that a mountain does not bow to the petty wants of children or their spoiled spouses. Tomorrow, I would show them how much farther I was willing to go. By the sixth night, the storm still had its claws sunk deep into the mountains. The air inside the cabin was rank with sweat, damp logs, and tension wounds so tight that every creak of the walls made someone jump. I decided it was time. As twilight fell, I gathered them in the main room. The fire burned low, shadows dancing like specters across their faces. They looked exhausted, brittle, hollow-eyed from hunger and quarrels. "We're going to play a little game," I announced, my voice steady but firm. "A night of truth. Each person around this fire will confess something about themselves or about someone else in this room. No lies, no evasions. You'll speak, or the food stops entirely." All heads jerked toward me at once. Nobody spoke. Cassie's laugh was sharp, frantic. "What, are you running some twisted reality show, Margaret? Who put you in charge like this?" I leaned forward. "This is my cabin. My rules. And you all came here demanding my labor, my home, my peace. Now you'll give me what I've asked for." The silence that followed was so heavy, I could feel the children shrinking against their parents, unsure if their grandmother had gone mad, or if this was the moment they'd realize they never truly knew me at all. It started with Claire. Always fragile, always simmering, she cracked first. "I hate you, Martin," she blurted suddenly, her voice breaking. "I hate the way you make me feel like trash every time you brag about your job, your house, your perfect little life. You think you're better than me, and maybe you are, but God, I can't breathe whenever you're around." Martin turned red, his mouth twisting. "Oh, please. You ruined your own life, Claire. Don't blame me for failing at marriage, at money, at pretty much everything." "Enough!" Daniel shouted then, his voice louder than I'd heard since he was a boy. His face was pale, but his fists were clenched. "You two are exactly why I never wanted to come to family events. Everything's a competition, everything's judgment. I spend more time defending Cassie from your snide comments than enjoying myself." Cassie whipped her head toward him, eyes blazing. "Defending me? Are you kidding? You don't defend me, you sit there like a blank wall while your family tears into me. Your precious mother included." They were spiraling, voices overlapping, grievances boiling to the surface like a flood I had waited decades to watch wash them out. I sat back, watching, drinking it in like fine wine. What none of them seemed to notice, too caught up in their chaos, was that I had purposely dimmed the fire until only enough light flickered to reveal their strained faces. Darkness pressed around them, closer and closer. I wanted them trapped, turned inward, forced to face the disintegration not just of their stomachs or their sleep, but of the very illusion of family they clung to. At last, it was Cassie who snapped fully. "You know what? I'll say it." She stood up, her voice shaking with fury. "I never wanted to marry into this family. Not once. Daniel, I settled for you because you were safe, you'd never leave me. And the rest of you? You're leeches. Entitled, selfish, cruel." And her finger stabbed the air toward me, "She is the ugliest part of it all. You think you're strong now, Margaret? You're just a lonely old woman desperate to matter." The words stung. But something else stirred beneath them, triumph. Because there it was, the mask torn off, the poison spat into the air where everyone could hear it. Daniel's face broke, devastation carving lines deeper than the storm outside. Claire stared, wide-eyed. Martin shook his head in disbelief. And I? I only smiled. The storm outside eased that night, though they didn't know it yet. The roads would be clear enough by morning. They could leave. But not before I gave them the parting gift I had been carefully arranging from the very beginning. I thank you, I said softly, rising slowly to my feet, my shadow stretching across the floor. For proving my point. For showing me that I was never wrong to feel invisible, unappreciated, small. Look at you, spitting, grasping, unraveling when stripped of comforts for just a few days. I let my eyes sweep across them one by one. You didn't come here out of love. You came here to use me, again. To take. To drain. Then I turned sharply toward the door and unlatched it. The storm's remnants still whipped the trees outside, but the night air was freeing, exhilarating. The cabin will no longer house you, I whispered. Not as long as I live, not as long as these mountains stand. Leave. Go back to your lives, you've taken enough of mine. Their faces, shocked, pale, some even fearful, were enough to feed me more than any meal ever had. By the time morning came, their cars groaned down the muddy road one by one, engines straining against the mountain's grip. No hugs. No promises to call. Just silence, each vehicle disappearing into the distance. And when the last taillight vanished, I stood on the porch in the gray dawn, the trees dripping with rain, and let out the first true breath I'd taken in years. For the first time, I wasn't the servant. I wasn't the background. I was the mountain itself. And the mountain keeps what is hers, and casts out anyone who dares to take it away. The cabin was quiet again. The kind of quiet that pressed into your skin and reminded you that silence wasn't emptiness, it was freedom. For 6 days, this house had swallowed my voice under theirs. And now, all that was left was me, and the creak of the old porch beneath my feet, and the mountain wind whistling through the pines. I should have felt guilty. A proper mother, a proper grandmother, would. But guilt had been the rope they had used to tether me for decades. And I had cut it, one knot at a time. They didn't leave without drama, of course. As dawn slipped over the ridges, Martin came to me, his jaw tight, his voice clipped. You've lost it, Mom. When we go back, don't expect us to come up here again. I met his glare evenly. That is exactly what I want. Claire hovered in the background, her face a storm of emotions, anger, fear, relief. She opened her mouth once, then shut it again. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to throw at me. Daniel lingered longest, his eyes glassy with hurt. I knew why, because Cassie's words had clawed something inside him raw. But sympathy no longer had a place between us. He finally said, You've changed, Mom. No, I answered softly. I finally stopped changing for all of you. Then he was gone too. One by one, their cars slid down the dirt road until the cabin stood alone. Until I stood alone. And I realized I preferred it that way. Do I believe they'll try again? Perhaps. Parasites always circle back to their host when hunger gnaws hard enough. But I am not naive. Before they left, while their voices rose in confessions and accusations, I had been listening and recording. The old cabin radio had long been replaced by a discreet digital recorder I purchased the very week I brought the deed home. Every bitter word, every vicious truth, every betrayal they spit during the night of truth sat safely on memory cards now tucked into my chest drawer. If they return, if they dare threaten to reclaim the space or paint me as unwell, I will remind them how quickly the world can shatter illusions when ugly family truths spill into light. It is not blackmail. It is balance. For so many years, I believed family was obligation. That love meant labor, that to matter meant serving at tables where my own plate was always late and half empty. I thought silence was dignity. I thought sacrificing myself was legacy. But staring at the fire's glow now, listening only to its comfortable crackle and not the shrieks of voices bleeding me dry, I know the truth. Silence was not dignity. It was erasure. Family was not love. It was hunger. And revenge was not cruelty. It was reclamation. The deliberate act of saying, no more. When dusk fell again, I walked the porch as the forest sang its night hymns. An owl swept low above the tree line. An elk cried somewhere distant. The kind of living, breathing things my children never noticed because they were too busy bleeding me dry. The mountain felt like it had finally accepted me. As though the cabin's bones had shifted slightly, sighing in relief, grateful that its rightful keeper had driven out the noise. I poured myself the last cup of wine from a bottle I'd saved all week. No glass this time, just me, the bottle, the stars emerging one by one. And I whispered to the shadows. This is my cabin. My silence. My life. And it will never belong to them again. 3 months later, a letter arrived. I knew the handwriting at once, Cassie's, blunt and looping. Against my better judgment, I opened it. They wanted Thanksgiving at the cabin. 24 heads this time. Food, space, indulgence. I read it once, twice, and then smiled. I didn't respond. Instead, I fed the letter to my cabin's fire and watched it curl, blacken, and collapse among the embers. Outside, the trees whispered. And I knew the mountain agreed, no invitation was ever needed here again. It was the dead of winter when they came back. I knew they would. Greed isn't easily starved, and entitlement always finds its way back to feed again. Snow fell heavy that week, blanketing the mountains, dulling every noise until the world felt like it had been smothered under white silence. I heard the tires crunch before I saw the headlights sliding through the drifts. 3 cars this time. Fewer people than before, but the ones I had expected. Martin. Claire. Daniel. And, of course, Cassie, with her sharp jaw and colder heart. They hadn't written this time. They hadn't called. They had simply arrived, as though the cabin was still an inheritance they could claim. Not anymore. They stomped snow from their boots, their breath fogging in the cold, and stood huddled in my entryway like beggars at a gate. Only, they weren't beggars, they were predators who thought they still owned me. Mom, Martin said, his voice too smooth, too rehearsed, we thought about what happened. We want to start over. The kids miss you. We all miss you. I tilted my head, studying him. Even now, he couldn't hide the little smirk flaring at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't here for me. He was here for the cabin, for free holidays, for comfort I had bought and built. Claire fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting away when I dared look at her. Daniel, tired and ruined by Cassie's poison, stayed silent. And Cassie? She met my eyes as though daring me to refuse. We were thinking, she said smoothly, about Thanksgiving here again. That word again. Thanksgiving. The holiday where they had devoured everything and left me with nothing. I smiled. For the first time in years, it was genuine. That's a wonderful idea, I whispered, stepping aside so they could spill into the house. Their faces lit with relief, smug even, as though they had bent me back into submission. But they didn't see the small locks I had fixed onto each door over the last few months. They didn't notice me slide the deadbolt quietly into place once the last one crossed the threshold. They didn't notice when I lingered by the mantel, fingers brushing the discreet camera I'd installed, ready to record. Come, I said. Let's sit by the fire. One last family meal. I had spent days preparing, long before they arrived, for I knew they would return. On the table sat steaming bowls already laid out, broths laced just enough with bitter herbs to churn the stomach, to leave them restless, weak, pliable. They ate without question, too hungry and entitled to suspect. And then I began again. My night of truth. This time, they didn't resist. Perhaps the shadows of last time haunted them, perhaps the bitter food loosened their tongues. But soon, they unraveled again, accusations, betrayals, confessions spilling like blood across the floor. Martin shouted. Claire wept. Daniel broke his silence, roaring at Cassie until even she buckled under the weight of her own mask. I watched. And waited. When at last they had exhausted themselves, broken pieces lying in my once sacred living room, I stood. My children, I said, my voice calm, almost tender. You have proven yourselves again. You're not family. You're hunger in human shape. Parasites who mistake flesh for love. And now, you will leave this place, not tomorrow. Not when you decide. Now. Confusion flickered first, then rage, then fear. For they realized in that moment that I was not merely asking. The cabin was ready, doors bolted, shutters latched, and me between them and freedom until I chose to release them. And I only released them when the storm grew worse outside, when the wind screamed down the slopes and the snow turned wild, forcing them to crawl away into the tempest like the desperate interlopers they were. They left. They had no choice. And this time, I watched until their silhouettes vanished into the storm, and I knew in my heart they would not come back again. Now, I sit alone in the quiet heart of this mountain cabin. My cabin. My silence. My life. They may slander me. They may call me mad. But they will never again take from me what is mine. And if they dare, I know what these mountains will do. Because I was wrong about one thing all my life. I thought I belonged to them. But no. They belonged to me. And I have finally set them free. The storm raged for 2 more nights after they vanished down the mountain road. I imagined them stumbling through the snow, shivering in their cars, arguing and blaming one another for everything that had happened. I did not picture them kindly. I did not pray for their safety. For the first time in my life, I did not care if my children survived the night. Because survival had always been my burden, not theirs. It had always been me cooking, me cleaning, me stitching the invisible threads of family that only ever tightened around my throat. Now, I breathed freely. When dawn broke on the 3rd day, there was no trace of them. No cars in the drive. No footsteps in the snow. Just the cabin, the pines, the silence. Mine. Over the following weeks, I cleansed their presence from my cabin. Their crumbs swept from the floorboards, their perfume scrubbed off the quilts, their careless fingerprints rubbed away from the windows. I patched dents made when arguments had turned to shoving. I fixed a broken latch someone had slammed too hard. I burned the sheets they had slept on. This was more than cleaning. This was purification. Step by step, my cabin returned to me, lighter, purer, as though it too sighed in relief to no longer house such greed. Every chore, every act of repairing, made me stronger. I was no longer a servant to them. I was keeper of this place. When night fell, and the wind curved low through the dark pines, I sometimes thought I heard voices. Not human voices, those I would never mistake again, but whispers like the mountain itself was speaking through stone and snow. You are not weak, the whispers seemed to say. I am with you. I was always with you. I would sit by the fire, rocking gently, my wine glass trembling slightly in my hand, and close my eyes to listen. The mountain didn't pity me. It mirrored me. Enduring, silent, immovable. A presence taken for granted until it chose to remind everyone that even landscapes had teeth. In late spring, hikers sometimes came near the ridge. Tourists, young couples, families seeking selfies with the sweeping peaks. From my porch, I would watch them through narrowed eyes, staying quiet as they passed the long gravel road that led toward my cabin. They never came close enough. I would not welcome them if they did. For the world beyond my bloodline was no different. People lived to consume. To take what they never built. To drain what was never theirs. It wasn't the world's hospitality I needed. It was my solitude. My belonging to this mountain, and it to me. Sometimes, in my weaker hours, I thought of writing to Daniel. Not Martin, not Claire, and certainly not Cassie. Only Daniel. A few unsent drafts sit folded in my desk drawer. I wrote things like, "Son, I know you meant well once." Or, "Daniel, you were the kindest before she caged you." But I never signed them. And I never mailed them. Because weakness is what they fed on. And even if Daniel had a softer heart, it was still a hungry one. I left the letters in the drawer, where they belonged, with the recorder, still holding every confession, every poisoned truth they had spilled during those nights of storm and hunger. My permanent reminder. My insurance. My weapon. I sometimes wonder if one day they'll come back, not for me, but for my death. Children who abandon me in life may circle when they smell inheritance. But my cabin will never belong to them. I've already written the deed into a foundation that protects the land. When I die, this mountain cabin becomes part of a preserved trust, locked away from developers, unclaimed by greedy heirs. They will arrive with their papers, their demands, their false tears, and find nothing. The cabin will belong to the mountain. Which means, truly, it will belong to me forever. For decades, my family thought they knew me. They thought I was small, meek, pliable. Now, I see how wrong they were. I was never small. I was contained. Contained until one mountain storm gave me the courage to stop serving and start reigning. Contained until silence stopped being an erasure and became my weapon. Contained until I remembered, mothers are not meant to be slaves, not meant to drown in casseroles and unspoken grief. I am not their servant. I am not their sacrifice. I am Margaret Hill. And this mountain is mine. Forever. It was nearly a year later when I heard it, 3 sharp knocks at the cabin door. Not hikers, not strangers. I knew that rhythm. When I opened it, the cold rush of March air sliced in, and with it, my children. Martin, standing tall like he owned something. Claire, bitter and weathered. Daniel, quieter but hollow-eyed. And, of course, Cassie. Always Cassie. She walked in without asking, her boots clomping across the welcome mat. "Margaret," she said, voice cool as steel. "We've come to talk about the cabin. It should pass down to the family. To us. Not rot away with you." Her words were not a request. They were a claim. I almost laughed. They thought grief might have softened me. That time dulled my edge. That loneliness could be weaponized to chain me again. But they didn't understand, loneliness was freedom. "You've come for a house that isn't yours," I said evenly. "A place you never built, never paid for, never respected. You've come not as family, but as vultures." Martin's jaw worked, impatient. "We're your blood. This place belongs to us after you. Stop being unreasonable." It was then I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the small recorder. Its black surface gleamed in the firelight as I set it down on the table. "Do you remember the storm?" I asked, voice low. "Do you remember the filth that poured out of your mouths? Every confession? Every betrayal? Every ugly truth you spewed into these walls?" Cassie froze. "You wouldn't dare." I pressed play. Their voices filled the cabin, their drunken, bitter accusations, Cassie's venom toward Daniel, Claire's hatred, Martin's cruelty. Word for word. They paled, every one of them. "You thought you held me hostage with your demands," I whispered, leaning closer. "But I have kept every word. And if you push me, the world will know what kind of family you really are. Do you want your colleagues, your neighbors, your children to hear the truth of who you are?" The silence that fell then was thick, suffocating. Cassie recovered first, snarling through her teeth. "You're insane." But her bravado was broken glass now, jagged and weak. "Perhaps," I said softly. "But I am the only one sane enough to finally see you for what you are. And saner still to make sure the mountain never remembers you." I opened the door to the cold, pointing out toward the long road. "Leave. Now. Or I press one button, and your poison spreads farther than any of you can crawl back from." Martin started forward as if to argue, but Daniel's hand clamped on his arm. His face, my son's face, was tight with something like fear. Perhaps of me, perhaps of the truth. One by one, without another word, they filed out. Cassie last, her glare sharp as knives. But even her eyes carried something else now. Defeat. When they were gone, when the sound of their car engines died into the wilderness, I tucked the recorder back into its drawer. Unused. Still safe. Because the truth of revenge isn't violence. It isn't blood. It's knowledge. They will spend every day knowing I hold their worst selves in my hands. They will never approach me again without wondering, will she use it this time? Will this be the day she burns us to ash with our own words? I don't need to press play again. The fear already lives inside them. Now, the cabin belongs only to me. And when I am gone, it will pass not to them, but to the earth, to the mountain, to the silence that chose me. They will drive past these slopes someday, older, more hollow, still gnawed by the hunger I starved in them. They will see smoke from the chimney, or maybe not, maybe only the bones of the cabin standing proud in snow and pine. And they will remember the one truth they could never bend, never break. That I was the mountain. And the mountain never forgives. After they left for the final time, the mountain smothered itself again under heavy snow. I lived in peace, rising with the pale light, keeping my fire steady, and walking the creaking porch with coffee in hand. But peace is a peculiar thing. It invites you to notice everything. Every ripple of air, every creak in the woods, every stranger who dares pass too close. That winter, I caught myself awake late at night, wondering, would they come again? Would Martin in his arrogance, Claire in her bitterness, Daniel in his weakness, or Cassie in her endless hunger ever dare walk up this mountain road? The answer was yes. Of course yes. Greed and hate are more durable than love. So I prepared. I did not buy weapons. That was not my way. Instead, I fortified with patience. I moved the recorder's copies into town, into a safe deposit box under legal seal. I rewrote my will again, ensuring in permanent ink that not one of them, not child or grandchild, would ever inherit this place. I dug into the mountain itself, building a hidden storeroom beneath the cabin floorboards, lined with preserves, wood, kerosene. A woman cannot defend her life on fear alone, she must be untouchable. If they returned, they might find me. But they would never take anything again. It was early spring when I first saw signs, boot prints where no hiker should tread. Heavy, deliberate, circling the cabin. They didn't knock this time. They watched. At night I glimpsed headlights far along the ridge. The engine cut, the lights vanished, but I knew the car was there, waiting. The mountain whispered to me, "They are circling." And I believed it. If it were just Martin, or Claire, or Daniel, I might have dismissed it. But no, it had Cassie's scent. She was the one who never accepted defeat, the one who mistook persistence for power. It was her ambition, her hollow hunger, that reeked in these woods even when she was silent. One night, as I sat by the fire, I swore I heard a voice echo faintly, a hiss almost carried in the wind. Old woman. Whether it was real or my mind shaping wind into words, I smiled. Come closer, I whispered back into the flames. See what happens this time. I realized, then, that revenge wasn't an act. It wasn't in the meal I starved them with, or the confessions I forced, or the recorder full of shame. Those were only sparks. The real revenge was this, living in their minds like rot. From now until their last breaths, they will never look at me again without fear. Never drive these roads without wondering if I still hold the proof, the leverage, the power. Every time they fight as a family, and they will fight, they will hear echoes of that storm cabin night, every confession, every truth. My voice will haunt them longer than my body ever did. I see it in my mind sometimes, years from now, long after I've gone. Cassie standing at the base of the empty mountain road, perhaps older, her beauty gone sharp, her eyes wild with that hunger no man could ever sate. She will stare up at where the cabin once stood. And she will know, even then, that this place never bowed to her. That it never belonged to her. That she lost to me, not just once, not just twice, but forever. And when the wind sighs through the pines, she'll hear it murmur the only truth I left carved into this world. The mountain keeps what is hers. I was not afraid when death finally came for me. It was not sudden, nothing so merciful. It crept slowly, the way winter frost creeps against a cabin window, spreading, catching, sealing me in. My hands grew weaker, my steps slower. But the mountain seemed to know, to cradle me into its silence. On the night of my last breath, I sat in my chair by the fire, the recorder resting beneath my hand, the flame low and steady. Outside, the pines swayed, each whispering that I had kept my vow. I closed my eyes, not in sorrow, not in regret, but in triumph. For I knew I had already put everything in place. In town, in a lawyer's office far from these mountains, a sealed envelope bore my signature. When opened, it revealed the truth I had spent months perfecting. The cabin, the land, everything I bought with my own blood and silence, would pass into permanent trust. To no child. To no grandchild. To no Cassie, no Martin, no Claire, not even Daniel. Instead, it became the property of the Mountain Conservation Foundation. Untouchable. Eternal. What they expected to inherit in wealth, they inherited in absence. And that is the heaviest inheritance of all. But my final blow was not the deed. It was the recordings. I left them copies, every confession, every betrayal, every venomous word they spat during that storm night. Delivered by the same lawyer, directly into each of their hands. No threats, no commentary. Only the evidence of who they truly were when stripped of comfort. That was my goodbye. Not tender words of a mother. Not blessings of a grandmother. Only their own voices, returned to them like knives. I imagine them sitting there in their houses, tearing open the package. Martin listening to his arrogance played back in his own voice, discovering the respect his colleagues might one day hear. Claire, broken, hearing her hatred laid bare for anyone to witness. Daniel, hearing Cassie's confession that she never loved him, only settled. And Cassie herself, staring into the mirror of her own venom, realizing I've etched her ugliness permanently into history. What is ruin if not having your mask stripped forever? When they drive up someday, hoping to claim what isn't theirs, they will find the cabin locked, the deed forbidden, the mountain owned, not by them, but by silence itself. They will step onto the gravel where I once stood, but they will not find me. Only the echo of my final truth. You never owned me. You never owned this cabin. And you never will. The winds will carry my voice down the ridges, across the pines, through the frozen rivers. I am gone, but I am here. Because the mountain keeps me. And the mountain never forgives. And so my revenge completed itself not in anger, but in permanence. I was not just a woman they underestimated. I became the storm they could never escape, even when I was dust in the earth. Let them live the rest of their days with those recordings, with my laughter hidden between their silences, with the truth carved deeper than blood. I am Margaret Hill. And I won. Forever.